And then look at verse 28, just 6 verses later. So all those in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath, and rose up and thrust him out of the city, and led him to the brow of the hill on the city which was built, that they might throw him down over the cliff. What in the world happened between verse 22 and verse 28 that you would say, wow, this is the man, and then just one story later you would go, okay, he deserves to die. I mean, they don't just go from wow to, I don't know if we're coming back tomorrow night. No, they go from wow to let's kill him as fast as possible. He is so dangerous, he needs to die now, because we cannot let out of this room what just came out of his mouth. And I find this is amazing to me. Like, what could have happened that would take them from what I call from awe to anger? Because they're in awe, and then they're so mad that they wish that he would die. Now, you've read the Luke chapter 4 story before. I've read the Luke chapter 4 story before. I'm not trying to give you new material tonight. I'm not going to put something in the Bible that hasn't always been there. But what I like to do sometimes is sort of turn the stones over that we've gotten so used to being there. They've gotten smoothed over in our consciousness. Because what happens sometimes is we read the Bible and we read it so much we're like water moving over a rock. It gets real smooth. If you take that rock and flip it over, it's the same rock, but it's got new edges, new sides. And sometimes we got to flip the scripture over and go, what if he's saying something we've stopped thinking about? And the reason why we do that is because we are not first century Jews. And so we're 21st century Americans, which means we think about things differently than a first century Jew. So in some ways, the Jesus you have up here right now, whatever Jesus you have up here right now, in some ways is influenced more than you know by the fact that you're a 21st century American. And the Jesus you just read about in Luke chapter 4, in more ways than they could have imagined, was influenced by first century Judaism, living in a backwater region of the Roman Empire, the most powerful empire in the world of that day. And that Jesus that's standing in front of them is influenced by that. So, knowing that we can't get in a time machine and go back in the first century, what we're going to try to do tonight is, as best as possible, think in terms of that first century Jew. And the way we have to do that is look at the stories they were familiar with. And Jesus actually uses 3 of them in this Luke chapter 4 passage. The first one that he uses is at the top of the story. It's what caused them to be amazed. I want to read that with you. In Luke chapter 4, look in verse 16. Jesus comes to Nazareth. Now we're going right back to the top, all right? We're going to lead you up to 22. We're going to run you through 22. We're going to end up way back there in 28 when everybody wants Jesus to die. And I want to find out what's going on. We're going to investigate those 3 stories. Here's how it begins. He came to Nazareth where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. Can I just take a pause here real quick before we read any farther? This is a habit I have sometimes. I see it. I want to talk about it for a second. So rather than read the whole thing and then come back. Notice that Jesus had a custom to get together with his family. That's a custom we need. And I mean your church family. All right? And I know I'm preaching to the choir. Anytime you say this to people who are at church, you're preaching to people who are at church, not people who are not at church. But whatever you call church, you need it because you're a follower of a man who believed it was good custom to get together with other people who believed in his God. So, whether you do that in a Sunday morning go to meeting or you do that in your living room over coffee, get with other believers in an environment where you can turn it into a custom. Also, church, customs are not bad. They're only bad when they shroud you from being able to see the love of God. Custom gone to seed is whenever it becomes bigger than the God the custom was pointing at. And that's what happened to a lot of us in religion, is the religion got bigger than the God we were supposed to be falling in love with, and then you cut the custom out. But we don't cut custom out because custom's bad. We cut anything out that shrouds and clouds the vision that we should have of a loving Father, all right? So Jesus had a custom of getting together with other believers, other of his family. He went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and he stood up to read, and he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written. And you might jot this down. The place where it is written is Isaiah 61. The reason I want you to know that is because on your own personal Bible study, this is a fun project. Go back to Isaiah 61 and see what Jesus did with Isaiah 61, and you might be surprised that he actually plays with it a little bit. Jesus goes back to Isaiah 61. He even adds a thing that's not in Isaiah 61. So Jesus is listening to the Spirit as he reads the text. And he's listening to what his Father would have him say in Isaiah 61 when he says this in Luke 4:18. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted and to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind. To set it by the way, recovery of sight to the blind is what you won't find in Isaiah 61 when you go back and read this later. Jesus adds that one. No one had ever healed a blind man of blindness in the history of the world until Jesus. And so Jesus comes to make the healing of the blind an allegory. I don't mean he didn't really heal them, but he wants to use it as an allegory for setting right what went wrong in the garden. Man's eyes, the scales fell off and his natural eyes opened. The problem was when his natural eyes opened in the garden, his spiritual eyes went blind. Jesus came to reverse and get us to stop looking at the natural and start looking at the spiritual. And so Jesus said, I come to make blind people see. I come to reverse what messed mankind up. I want to give them sight.